YSOLDE by Nathalie Henneberg. Originally published in the author's French language in the January 1961 issue of Fiction magazine, an English-language version translated by Damon Knight next appeared in the June 1968 issue of International Science Fiction magazine, followed by an inclusion in a 1976 anthology entitled The Best from the Rest of the World. It was in a French collection of the author's stories in 1977 and English in 2010. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel Quasar Spectra. YSOLDE 1. When he embarked for Nix, the seventh planet of the spike in Virgo, with his daughter Isa, a blind and deaf child, enclosed in her immobility like a little mother-of-pearl idol with white, golden hair, Ross the technocrat knew he was doing a senseless thing. He had scoured the galaxy in search of an impossible miracle. He had consulted the physicians, the healers, and wise men of innumerable planets. In vain. All confessed themselves powerless. Isa had been born of an all-but-dead mother, crushed in the wreckage of a spaceship, and death had never quite released its grip on the cells of her body. Nevertheless, they had kept her alive for years. Ross would not give up. He would not have been what he was, a technocrat if he were capable of weakness or despair. Somewhere between the herdsman and the whale, fate had given him one last chance. A traveler had told him about the strange quality of Nix. "Don't bother telling me that it's an improbable world," said the astronaut. He had the graven, waxy mask of those who have stared too long through narrow screens at infinity and the stars. They were sitting under the climatized dome of a federal station on an artificial satellite, waiting for the next ship. It was an unforeseen accident that had brought the great technocrat to rub elbows with the mob. He congratulated himself on it. And it was a station like many others beyond Pluto, with its plexiglass bubbles for differing gravities and atmospheric pressures, its humidifiers for the overplants, and its iridescent artificial suns. One was surrounded here by the fauna of 100 universes, the gritty, purplish cones of foramen and the spider flowers of the Hyades, the thread-like capillans and the crystalline intelligences of Alpha Boötis. With a sweeping gesture, the explorer took in that whole mass. We've grown used to them, haven't we? But the first sight of them made me feel pretty small, and their worlds are the same, sometimes dazzlingly beautiful, sometimes disconcerting and almost absurd. Why should this fiery abyss be inhabited by creatures made of translucent quartz? Or why should that frozen black globe have its caverns full of the most fragile orchids? You know, there are whole phyla that are alive in the organic sense of the word, only 1 year out of every 1,000. But then, what a dazzle of colors! What was I saying? "You were talking about Nix," said Ross. "Ah, Nix. That's something else again. Everything is real there, but time flows backward. Is it an effect of the planet's rotation or of its sun, Spica? It's an enormous one, you know. There are 110 stars in Virgo, and it's the most brilliant of them all, a supergiant that you can see from Earth with the naked eye." "How do you mean, it flows backward?" asked Ross. He was taller by a head than the spaceman. He was tired, in a hurry to get back to Isa, and he hated to waste his time. "Oh, well, for instance, take Terra. She ages gradually. She has her ruins, her mountains erode away, certain gases escape from the atmosphere. The same things happen in the same way everywhere else in the universe, but on Nix it's different. It's a planet that was inhabited, civilized. Now it's returning to its origins, and so rapidly. 200 years ago, apparently the atmosphere and climate were like Earth's. Now you have to wear a pressure suit there. It's a hot box, swept with cyclones and floods, and the instruments register as much cosmic radiation as in our ionosphere. Curious, said Ross. Any other peculiarities? Well, there isn't much more to tell except that human connective tissue seems to reconstitute itself. Paralytics walk there, no doubt, and the blind see. The only thing is, there's another danger. The ship's doctor explained it to us as we were passing. All the dead cells revivify and proliferate. In time, it degenerates into a sort of cancer. Nyx is uninhabited today. Sirens summoned the passengers. A crowd separated the two Terrans, and Ross never saw the astronaut again. But as soon as he got back to Earth, he visited the cartographic office, its galleries hung with star charts, its armored towers of filing cabinets, and its implacable electronic brains which knew precisely everything about the universe. The functionaries of this important service had an unctuous and sacerdotal majesty, and they came from every part of the galaxy. Because of Ross's rank, he was received by the deputy director. "Someone mentioned Nyx to me," said the technocrat, seating himself across from this faintly mauve personage in his purple mitre. "How does it happen that this planet doesn't appear on the astrogational maps?" "Ah," said the other. "Nyx, it was formerly in our atlas. It was, how shall I put it, effaced. Yes, by order. You see, in the early days of galactic exploration, the scout ships put pretty nearly everything on their charts, unimportant asteroids and hell planets. Later on, the authorities began to put some of these places off limits, the really intolerable ones, but they realized that would only attract swarms of adventurers to them. To people like that, a forbidden planet is necessarily crammed with gold, or peopled with sirens, which the federal government reserves for itself. There were quite a lot of casualties. There was only one solution left: to obliterate the dangerous planets. That's what we did. That carries a danger with it. A pilot might land there by mistake. Most of them are off the regular routes, like Nyx. Why is Nyx dangerous?" Somewhat reluctantly, the cartographer pressed a button. A microfile opened. A tiny screen lit up on the opposite wall. The metallic voice of a robot told the improbable history of a world which had thousands of years of civilization behind it, a planet covered with the ruins of megalopolises, immense deserted landing strips, proud monuments falling apart under the weight of the temperature, the flora, and the general conditions of a carboniferous age. "It seems," said the deputy director, "that we're dealing with a phenomenon brought about by the recent enormous nuclear explosion of the furnace Spica, an old sun which must have returned to its primitive state. Nyx, in any case, is also returning to its genesis. It should be interesting to see where this devolution will stop. The origins of life might be studied there." "By whom?" Ross asked. "Oh, scientists from terrestrial stations." "There is a laboratory on Nyx," the robot responded obligingly. "Two prize-winning biologists are conducting local observations, Dr. Loris Neville and Dr. Marina Neville, certificated, married, on Nyx for 3 years." "And they're still alive?" "So far, yes." The cartographer was able to turn off the loquacious machine. Ross had no more questions for it. His stellar propulsion ship was waiting for him at Marsport. He left the next day, taking Isa with him. 2. Marina Neville passed the electron microscope to Loris. Her hand trembled slightly. They leaned together over the experimental tank in which the atmosphere of Nyx was being bombarded with various radiations. They were trying to recreate in the laboratory the exact conditions which had produced organic life on Earth. Above the prefabricated dome, which sheltered their precious apparatus, yawned the terrible sky of Nyx, studded with enormous diamonds. The 110 stars of the Virgin filled the vertiginous emptiness, and that dome of dark gold was striped with coal-black shadows of tree ferns. From the moment they set foot on the retrograde planet, the two scientists had approached their experiment as a great adventure. They knew without the need of words that they would never again see the gentle Earth, its mild oceans, its regular seasons, a stable and familiar world about which they knew everything save its origins. They knew also that their time on Nyx would be short. They had taken as their point of departure the old 20th century hypothesis of D'Auvilliers and Séguin. It was known that these two pioneering scientists had recreated the primeval conditions in a sealed environment. Their postulate was that the sun's ultraviolet rays, working on the oxygen and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and the ammonia in the seas, had created nitrogenous matter and given birth to the evolution which was to culminate in man. Nyx itself offered a medium for genesis, and the cosmic radiation and interstellar gases at the Neville's disposal completed the action of the ultraviolets. Today, the primary phase of the experiment had reached completion. Loris trained the microscope on the tank, which seemed empty to the naked eye. Nevertheless, on the tiny screen, bathed in a colorless flood, something moved among the vibrations and luminescences. It was impalpable and thin, visible only at high magnification, and for just a moment Neville thought that they had lost the game. But Marina extinguished all the lights except for the black light screen, and in that half-darkness the thing glimmered feebly, hardly more than the luminous spark of an electron. It must have possessed senses or some extrasensory perception, for it immediately fled to the bottom of the tank, exactly like a frightened animal, and for a second Marina felt herself watched by an unwinking gaze, not hostile, but terribly insistent and curious. She shivered and drew Loris aside on the platform that surrounded the lucite globe. "Well," she said, "have we found it?" He hesitated. "It looks like it. The invisible quantum, the spark of life in its pure state of plasma? No, radiant energy, I think. A form of light, in short. It's strange that no one has ever associated the two ideas, even though all the ancient scriptures speak of light and life together. Let's not get carried away. We've got a lot of analyses to do. I'll start on them now." "No, you won't," Marina protested, wiping her narrow white forehead under the fringe of blue-black hair. "Spica will be rising any moment. It will be unbearable outdoors, and our air suits are in the house. Come on, we've been up all night. It's time to have something to eat, like normal people. Let her irradiate herself a while longer, little Lumen. We'll call her Lumen Nivelia." "All right," he said. "You go ahead. I'll cover the globe." She left him, with a possessive smile and glance. In spite of everything, this tall, blond man with the gray eyes of a dreamer often seemed terribly far from her. In other times, the lords of Loris had worn a cross on their breastplates or had been riders of chimeras. On Earth, Marina had had to submit to an unusual treatment to cure her of jealousy. But on Nyx, all was well. Nyx was the vast, dreamed-of prison for a spirit that fled always toward the unknown and the invisible. While Loris covered the globe, she went down to the house, which was climatized like all the rest. She hurried. A glow of light, first blue, then purple, already rimmed the horizon. Huge Spica was about to rise, heating the retrograde planet's atmosphere to a fantastic degree, causing spores and seeds to burst. All the molds would come to life. The water in the ponds would begin to boil. Each new dawn found this world changed, more terrible, not to mention the storms. Marina paused before the big plexiglass window which formed one wall of the house. The city was silhouetted against the uncertain light, drowned by the jungle. Towers, domes, colonnades, these ruins had a quality of colossal harmony. Her eyes went to the thing she loved best, a temple, carved and pierced. At the corner of an intact balcony looking out over the forest, a statue devoured by moss was still beautiful, like a Valkyrie. "But not when you see her close up, surely," Marina had said, the day when Loris had pointed it out to her. "See how she's powdered with green? Under that veil she must be hollowed out, tunneled. Every pore in the stone is a nest of terribly active molds." "Well then," Loris had said, "she's half alive." It was only a statue. Marina gave a smile to her inoffensive rival, then went out on the terrace. To her surprise, Loris was standing there, looking absently toward the already incandescent sunrise. "What's wrong with Lumen?" she asked abruptly. She recognized that strained, obstinate expression. Loris turned his distorted face to her. "Lumen? It's living energy, all right, as I thought, but mutable, intermittent. It needs to be fixed in matter. I think that was the role played by Dauvilliers-Seguin's amino acids. Otherwise, as a quantum, indivisible, it exists for the shortest possible length of time, meaning that there's no more lumen in the tank. Don't get excited. I can make another one at will. And then you'll give it an acid breakfast." "Yes. No. Let me think." His face lighted up. "Why should we stick to classical methods and tie ourselves down to the frightful slowness of nature? Our lives wouldn't be long enough working with animated plasma. We could try a more daring experiment, introduce lumen into a complex biological organism." "You want to create a chimera, a monster? We're not talking about fables, Marina. And when I say monster," she interrupted, "I know what you're aiming at. First you want to reanimate a dead frog, then a saurian. A man is out of the question, luckily, unless you start working on anatomical pieces. But even with a frog it would be dangerous, because we know nothing about Lumen's characteristics. Do you want to turn a batrachian with an atomic brain loose on the universe? Enough atrocities. Come have your breakfast." He did not seem to hear. Inside, he put on his airsuit. "Where are you going?" Marina demanded. "There's a heaviness in the air," he said absently. "That means a storm. I'm going to turn on the cosmic ray projectors. The experiment ought to be interesting if—" The rest was lost in the hissing of the thick steam that rose from the ground, the furious crackling of bursting sepals, the whole prelude of a terrible symphony. Neville walked away like an automaton, and at the same moment Spica rose in an orange mist that concentrated its fires. Sky and earth took on the color and almost the consistency of lead, and the forest was no more than a hideous backdrop, placed there centuries ago for a tragedy. When the young scientist came back, violet tornado shapes linked the sky with the plateau. Nearby, the ocean boomed. The Nevilles knew the hurricanes of Nix, compared to which terrestrial cyclones were mere breezes. They hurried to seal the doors and close the shutters, transforming their house into an airtight unit, as closely sealed as a spaceship. Just as the last shield slid into place, a giant fern shattered itself on the roof. Marina turned on the periscopic screen. She loved storms. Out there it was an inferno, madness unchained. Purple balls of lightning were bounding under the horsetails. The enormous sun was only a pale spot among the cataracts and whirlwinds, and tresses of vines lashed the screen like floating hair. Finally, a new tornado arrived, whirling giant saurians and the trunks of mimosas 3 meters off the ground, and the screen suddenly stopped working. In the abrupt darkness inside the house, the last note of a record Loris had put on trembled for a moment in the air, a music that spoke of a ship scudding before the storm, of a Hyperborean ocean, and of 2 lovers linked by fate. Silence followed. Then, with terrible distinctness, the Nevilles heard a tapping in Morse on the shuttered door. SOS. Instantly they were on their feet. A living being was struggling there, in torment. A human cast away on Nyx was calling for help. Quicker than Loris, Marina was in front of the door. "Don't open it!" she cried. "It may be a trap!" As always, she interposed herself between him and the unknown, between him and the hostile, dangerous world. "Remember, we hardly know this planet at all. Remember the stories the explorers told? All those living sands, the plants that kill—" The signals were growing weaker. "You're crazy," said Loris. "Our first duty is to help any intelligent being in danger." "Intelligent? How do you know?" "It uses universal signals." She clung to the man's shoulders, trembling. "Don't open it! I'm afraid! I don't know why." As suddenly as it had begun, the tapping stopped. Tearing himself away from the 2 soft arms, Loris slid back the panel. A purple flash of lightning lit up the landscape. It was a terrible moment, the calm at the heart of the storm. In full daylight, the mad planet was shrouded in darkness. Amid the whirlwinds and electric discharges arose a Nyx of the Tertiary, fantastic with its mud aboil. Cataracts tumbled down the mountains. Against the pale blotch of Spica, the megalopolis held up its haunting profile. At the doorsill, Neville ran into 2 bodies. The man, burnt, unrecognizable, a black and red mask convulsed with pain, had fallen full length. Even in death, his arms were tightly clasped around a child, a silhouette of wax and mother of pearl, covered with a mantle of long golden hair. She did not seem wounded, but Neville, bending over her, could not hear her heartbeat. He lifted her. She was heavy and already cold. The charred dead man seemed to stare at Loris with reproach. This dead man who, after a stellar shipwreck, had made his way through the Neozoic jungle and all its traps with his child in his arms. Neville was seized with remorse. At that instant, the cataclysm broke out anew. An immense line of fire cut the firmament in half, and the lightning struck the dome of the laboratory. Picking up the young body in his arms, the scientist threw himself back into the house and closed the panel. "She's only a child," he said, "and I'm afraid she's dead." They did everything they could for her. In the end, they had to give up. The girl, who might have been 15, wore a bracelet with her name, Y. Ross. It was a name everyone knew. The technocrat's ship had landed on Nyx to be met by the hurricane. But why had he come to this demented planet? No one could give them the answer, and bending over the lovely corpse, Marina and Loris gave no thought to their own disaster or the destruction of the laboratory. 3. The storm lasted 24 hours and ended as suddenly as it had begun. Neville went out and surveyed a scene of desolation. In 2 days and nights, Nyx had regressed a geological age. The ancient ruins were flattened. Only a few edifices of indestructible jade or onyx were still standing here and there, and the green statue on the roof of the temple. "Stay here," Neville said to his wife. I'll go and see if there's anything left worth saving." He pointed to the laboratory, which was virtually obliterated. "Afterward, we'll have to bury those two." It was impossible to preserve the bodies. Loris had no idea what condition the electronic installations were in. Probably everything had been broken, ripped apart. He left, and Marina was alone with the young dead girl. This time she had not protested. She felt strangely humble and guilty, and she searched for excuses. "Actually," she told herself, "we couldn't really do anything for them. The child was already dead when the man arrived, only to die himself." Then, once more, she put aside these useless rationalizations. The past was the past. They had to live and face the future. What were their own chances of survival? "We have this house intact, and the provisions in the cellar. We have our air suits, a light rifle, a disintegrator, which I don't know how to use. The rifle has a radioactive bead a little too large. The other day I shot at a saurian that was carrying off a mouflon. I killed a big lizard, but the flesh of the mouflon was radioactive, unfit to eat. I've got to ask Loris to fix the bead. If we manage to repair an interplanetary transmitter, we'll have to try to reach Earth. They'll evacuate us, probably. I won't like that at all." She was happy on Nyx, with Loris. She didn't mind the storms. She made her rounds as usual, corrected an excess of ozone in the air, turned on the climatizers, and inspected the storeroom. Everything was apparently in order. But when she went back to the living room, a strange, oppressive feeling came over her, a feeling she had had once before, as if someone were watching her, withdrawn and curious. She turned mechanically. The child's body, which they had placed on a folding bed in the corner of the room, had not moved, but the sheet that covered it had slipped down, revealing a face as white as cherry blossoms, as snow, as the abyss, and immense, wide-open eyes. They were strange, those eyes, between their long lashes like fringes of black velvet. They were vast and clear like the spangled sky of Nyx, and they were certainly not human. If the elements could see, they would look like that, thought Marina, stunned. Automatically she moved forward, but suddenly the girl's body under the sheet made a sinuous movement of withdrawal, like a supple and flexuous animal retreating. Exactly that kind of motion. "I'm losing my mind," said Marina to herself. "Lumen! At the instant the lightning struck the laboratory, there was a lumen under the cosmic ray projector. A quantum of life that escaped, settled somewhere. In this corpse?" Even her thoughts stopped, frozen with horror. Call Loris? She had always tried to shield him from the outside world. Besides, she was not sure how he would react. No, she preferred to solve the problem alone. She straightened, walked toward the child. Then, without a breath, in a single squirm, the slender body rolled off the bed and flattened itself against the wall. The fixed, terrible eyes stared at Marina, eyes in which wavered the original light, and through the tunnel of that stare she entered the world of Genesis. Fabulous, a prodigiously ancient life, dating from before all morality and all differentiation. Marina understood that a new species had appeared on Nyx. She did not know her own powers as yet. Not all her muscles obeyed her. Probably she did not even have a voice. But all that was a matter of development, of acclimatization, for she could no longer doubt. Escaped from the shattered laboratory, Lumen had sought a host, and she had instinctively chosen the most complex organism. From that moment, two forces struggled within Marina, scientific curiosity and terror born of repulsion. The second had all but won. Her human hands were already stretched out to destroy the horrible, fascinating creature when Loris came back. His first words were, "She's alive!" Impulsively, he threw himself toward the cot behind which swayed the huddled form. Marina wanted to cry out, "Don't touch her! That isn't a human child! I don't know what kind of horror that we've created by accident, and that we ought to destroy before it begins to do harm." But her frozen lips did not move. Mute, immobile, she watched Neville bend over, lift the radiant little idol and her riches of golden hair. He laid her down on the bed and examined her, uneasy. "She fell," he said. "How did that happen? Her eyes are open, but can she speak? Can she hear? She's all stiff." As if in response to these anxious questions, the body lost its rigidity. It shivered, the fragile arms unfolded, rose like wings and settled in a cool collar upon the shoulders of the leaning man. Marina cried out, at long last, "Kill it! It's a monster, without a soul or a mind." Without a mind? From the instant when the spark of primitive life glittered in the cosmic darkness, Lumen had perceived and assimilated the universe. In her fashion, could the term mental process be applied to the slow concentric waves, the circular movement of electrons around their nucleus? Cogito, ergo sum. Turning the ancient Terran wisdom to her own use, Lumen lived. Therefore, she thought. It was not a monologue. Neither time nor space existed as yet for the unfinished creature. An occasional datum or image sprang up from the primal source. Little by little, a logic took shape. Beyond that was the darkness, the absolute void. Marina would have been chilled with terror if she could have entered that abyss, peopled with amorphous figures, vague ideas, formless monsters still lost in a chaos as old as the universe. Lumen's thoughts: "I am. I have always been. Or at least I've been part of something primordial, eternal. It was like an ocean into which endlessly flows all that is essentially life. Light, matter, and motion. An infinitesimal atom. I was lost in the universal symphony. I was taken out of my environment, hurled into the darkness. I was cold, and also, I don't know the word, when one retracts before an opposing principle. Yes, fear. Then the world exploded. It was horrible. I wanted to diffuse, dissolve myself, but something captured me like a magnet. It was suffering a terrible agony. Hot, red energy was pouring out of it in torrents. I fell aside, but then it grew cold. I labored in that ice, in that darkness. Now there is light again. A narrow container condenses and restrains me. Me, limitless, diffuse, a nebulosity. There are things I can't grasp. I haven't succeeded in moving this matrix of fragile flesh, but that will come. I can feel it. The contrary principle takes on a shape, too. The negative pole, I see it. They call that seeing. There is a word also for this bundle of intuition and nerves. A woman. Silence. Hide. She wants to destroy me. Why? She is large and powerful. Run. My body does not obey me. Slip down. Fall. the positive principle enters. When he is there, all is well. Our two energies communicate. But there must be a contact. He must come closer. I manage to loosen my rays. Or are they tentacles? I cling to him. The woman cries out. She wants to kill me. Marina had screamed at him. Now she realized that Loris had never looked at her so coldly. She stepped back involuntarily, put her hands to her bleeding mouth. "You're crazy," he said, as he had said once before in the uproar of the storm, while a hand stiffening with approaching death rapped at the door of the shelter. "The child has just come out of a coma. Think of the shock she's been through." His voice softened. "You're suffering from shock, too, I think. Take a sedative and lie down. You'll see, nothing nicer could have happened to us. Now we've got a little human sister. You won't be alone anymore when I'm away." "No!" Marina cried. "It's Lumen!" He looked at her uneasily. "By heaven, I wonder if the shock hasn't affected you more than I thought. Listen to me, Marina. The lab was struck by lightning, then flooded by rain. Everything is damaged, burned, or waterlogged. The experimental tank is full of muddy water. There's no more lumen, and no possibility of reconstituting the environment. Does that satisfy you?" With her back against the wall, Marina had managed to take down a corroded hatchet Neville had brought back from the megalopolis. She brandished it, trying to strike the light creature. Quick as lightning, the creature slid away and huddled against the wall. The weapon flashed through the air. Loris had not had time enough to intervene. A little blood spurted from Lumen's temple. She fell back, motionless in her glory of golden hair. Neville strode forward. He was pale with anger. "If this is how it's going to be," he said, "I'll lock you up." "I'm your wife, Loris." "Yes, and an attempted murderer. A dead man left this child on our doorstep. We have a responsibility to her. Come on." He led her into their room. She went without protest, inert, emptied of her rage. Her act seemed to her odious and grotesque. Neville closed the door on her and locked it, without a word. When she was locked in, she wanted to explain. She cried out, banged the wall. No one answered. Then she came to her senses, went to the medicine chest and took out a sedative. Loris had returned to the girl, who had seemed to have fainted. He looked frantically for a glass, some wine in the refrigerator, and finally settled for a short, squat flask of crystal in the shape of a wineskin, containing a golden liquor which he tasted as a precaution. Yes, it was just right for a child, a sweet Terran wine, thyme-scented. A sort of herb wine, he thought, pursued by a vague recollection, a legend or a few piercing notes of music that spoke of a green ocean. This couldn't harm anybody. The one mouthful he had swallowed was cool as autumn air, but deep within it there was a hidden fire. Loris knelt beside the girl's still body and forced the liquor drop by drop between her teeth. Lovely and terrible, the creature surged up in blood and gold, and he found himself staring into a charming, inverted face, the spangled ocean of her eyes, and her lips like a fruit waiting to be bitten. A strange fire was in him, an insinuating warmth. It seemed to Neville that he was coming home to the world for which he was made, a distant shore, a forgotten country. He bent down. The flowing hair smelled like honey. The mouth had the salt taste of spray. 4. Marina awoke with a start. Damn that sedative! Or had she taken an overdose? She had slept as if she had been poleaxed. Her memory was blurred, but her hand automatically explored Loris's vacant place on the pillow. Then that awful day came back to her, in all its details, with an intolerable clarity. She got out of bed and ran to the door. It was no longer locked. Neville must have come in to make sure his wife was asleep. The living room was empty. It was the pleasant hour before Spica's rising. The air, freshened by rain, smelled of seaweed, of the jungle. No doubt, Loris had gone out to prospect in the ruins without his airsuit, and Lumen had disappeared. Lumen. Suddenly, Marina felt terribly weak. Her hand reached for the crystal flask that had contained an ancient liquor, a wild elixir given to her by her grandmother. There was a legend attached to that wine, but she had forgotten it. The flask was empty. For an instant, Marina had a sharp, terrible sense of aloneness. She knew she had lost Loris. Had he ever really existed, that blonde rider of chimeras? He had come into her life, carried her off beyond the void, the stellar eddies, nebulas. Then he had disappeared again into nothingness, and Marina was left alone on a demented planet where mysterious life roamed among the tree ferns. She had to make an effort to control herself. Moving as if in a dream, she put on her airsuit, took down from its rack the light rifle, useful in spite of its too large radioactive bead. It felt comforting in her hand. She left the house and followed her instinct, or rather a subconscious strain of music, evoking another flat beach, a greener ocean. The path under the horsetails descended toward the ocean, glittering with 1,000 stars. Marina came to the shore. This was the place. They were lying on the white sand, she covered with the flowing, sparkling mantle of her golden hair. How had they ever mistaken her for a child? Long and slender, she gleamed like a pearl. Never had Loris gazed at his wife with such dolorous rapture. He had laid his disintegrator between them. Their hands did not touch. The waves died at their feet in a silken murmur, and the whole world was mysterious and pure, as at the dawn of its creation, when life emerged from the sea. Marina bit her wrist to suppress a convulsive shudder. She leaned against a boulder, aimed, fired. She knew the secondary radiations had not spared Neville. For the moment, that made her task easier. On the sand, the dark trace of a slender body faded away immediately. Marina sighed with relief. That was the last of Lumen. Loris was only stunned. She hunted up an intact carrier and took him back to the house. When he revived, she claimed total ignorance. Lumen? But he knew perfectly well that the tornado had destroyed their installation. There was no way of recreating the essential conditions of the experiment, and they could not contact Earth. Yes, a cosmic storm had swept Nyx. No doubt that accounted for this abrupt change in evolution. They must take that into account in future experiments. Yes, a ship had crashed, and they had found the bodies of Terrans. One of them was even buried under the giant horsetail in the clearing. A man. Afterward, Neville had been sick, that was all. Bitterly, tirelessly, she wove around him the veil of forgetfulness. Loris was very weak and could hardly get up. One day, when Marina had gone out, he slipped, as he often did, into a state of semi-consciousness. His hand, dangling off the bed, brought up a long golden hair, clotted with dried blood. He heard a piercing melody and glimpsed the icy sparkle of the stars on the sea. When Marina came back, he asked, "Was someone wounded here? I found this near the bed." Marina turned away, pretending not to hear. There was a certain cruelty in her action, but he had been cruel first. Time was on her side. Time. In the ruins of the laboratory, she found an interplanetary transmitter, almost intact, and destroyed it. Meanwhile, she took devoted care of Loris and led the primitive life of a pioneer. Since the hurricane had ruined the cultivatable area of camp, she had to hoard their stores of food. Out hunting or fishing, she took the path to the ruins. A strange, relentless youthfulness drove her to climb the eroded walls of buildings, leap into the pits that had been cellars, swim across ponds that had been swimming pools. She learned to go by night with a spear for big, purblind fish that shunned the light of Spica. Nevertheless, certain street corners, certain fishing ponds made her uneasy. A dim glow wavered there. She had never felt so light, so brisk, except for stabbing headaches accompanied by a slight swelling of the eyelids and temples. She seemed to have grown habituated to the climate of Nyx. In her longer and longer expeditions into the jungle, she formed the habit of taking the temple as her reference point. Built of green and white jade, almost veinless, it was probably the most ancient structure in the city, and the one that had best withstood the assault of the elements. And the statue of the goddess was always there. Marina smiled at it each time she passed. Until one time. At one of those Nyxian dawns, one of those rare moments when the world lived between the heavy darkness and the intolerable glare of day, Marina was coming back across the megalopolis. Her bag was empty. Her rifle had begun to jam, and she still could not manage the heavy disintegrator. Without her realizing it, everything was falling apart at the station. Machines were out of order, rusting to pieces. She had restored the electricity, but there were short circuits in the electronic brain. A tenacious mold covered the walls, and Marina took all this with astonishing lightness, as if she, too, were returning to childhood. Finding herself before a basin strewn with water lilies, whose smooth, dark waters trembled gently, she thought perhaps she could spear some of the huge batrachians that swarmed among the green leaves. She leaped up onto the curb, and the surface of the water reflected her with pitiless precision. Ragged clothes, her body strangely thickened, but endowed with a savage agility, and childish face with an unsightly tumor on the forehead. She had not even realized that the cells had proliferated. She felt only the sharp pang. This was how Loris saw her. Indeed, she must have become a horror to him. At the same moment, or nearly, under a sky of gold, her contracted pupils met the gaze of the goddess on her jade pedestal, lit by the green glow that penetrated the undergrowth. She was always there, immovable and victorious. The sheath of microorganisms had not succeeded in destroying the perfect harmony of her features. Great eyes opened in the touching softness of her face, like gulfs in which wavered a dreadful living glow. She had seen the birth and death of worlds, and she had survived them. She was life. In the uncertain glow of dawn, Marina thought she saw a faint smile curve the full lips. She fled because the thick hammering of blood in her temples was taking on a form, a meaning. Scattered through the night, emitted by all that trembles, lives, breathes, mosses, algae in the marsh, will-o'-the-wisp, she sensed the thoughts of the creature she had vainly tried to destroy. Lumen's thoughts. She is there. She wanted to kill me. She succeeded, or almost. I've lost my host again, and it's all the more dreadful because I'm differentiated. She has taken me away from him, that positive pull toward whom I yearn, with whom I must melt together to form a whole. Cast out into the icy darkness, my need to expand and disperse myself draws me toward the abyss. But then I know I would lose him forever. Our one contact was so brief. So I stay here, clinging to the infinitely small, to plants, to certain minerals which they penetrate, chained, trapped by the matter which holds me. I exist. I will not die unless it is with him. I exist. I will not die except with him. My siblings, my sisters, for we are born spontaneously now that the laboratory has been destroyed, do not know why they are. They wander with the phosphorescences over the eel grass. They sway with the seaweeds in the depths. I cling to stones devoured by moss. It is black and cold. High in the sky I am immobile and cannot lift my limbs of jade and onyx. But I am still beautiful, and I love him. 5. Marina's wild flight had taken her toward the pools she normally avoided, to the left of the camp. For a moment she thought she felt an enormous hostile presence. A monster was at her heels. Reeds crackled in the marsh, and immense jets of water spurted. She would not let herself look back. She ran. It was when she emerged into the clearing across from installations that she saw the ceratosaur, a walking mountain, preceded by a little head, flat and malevolent, horribly fanged. Marina fired her rifle with trembling hands. A feeble spark sprang out. The charge was exhausted. She screamed. What occurred then, in the old days, on Earth, would have been called a miracle. The door of the house opened, and Loris sprang out, armed, clad in his iridescent breastplate. The knight of legend had returned. Leaning against the wall to mask his weakness, he raised the disintegrator to his shoulder and fired. For a moment, at the edge of the empty clearing, Marina believed that Nyx had shown its power, that time had really turned backward. She was saved. Loris had never been struck by the radioactive discharge. Her wonderful, impossible life was about to begin again. But Loris, having destroyed the ceratosaur, let the weapon fall. He said, "I'm going to die, Marina. Where is Lumen?" She had the strength to say, with swollen, icy lips, "Who is that?" "You know very well. Life. Our life. Animating that child." Marina chose her words with cold cruelty, like a little girl who breaks a toy deliberately. "I burned the body she stole. She has no more form. She can't see or hear. Even if you called her, she wouldn't come." "Ah," he said, "that's what I wanted to know." Then he bent his knees and, slowly, like someone who has long ago taken the measure of his death and of the earth where he will sleep, he laid his temple on the sill and stretched out. For a long instant Marina remained motionless and mute. The satellites of Nyx, as they set, cast an iridescent light on the pale form lying across the sill, and suddenly the Terran woman heard a heavy step, a crackling of mimosas and ferns that no ceratosaur could have made. The purple sun of Spica rose over the horizon, and in its diffuse clarity, Marina, inexorably diminished, saw that enormous thing she could never understand, a stone, a figure of jade, worn, covered with green moss, that emerged from the forest and walked toward the dead man. That bent its knees and lay down beside him, mouth to mouth, motionless, forever. You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.